Alrighty. Hello and welcome to the very first Coding with Time live stream. Let me know if the audio is okay. Let me know if you can hear things okay in terms of like the mic to music ratio, if you need something to be louder or quieter. Just let me know. Yeah. I'm gonna wait a couple minutes just for some viewers to start trickling in. And then yeah, we're gonna go ahead and dive right into these topics. So yeah, just let me know how the sound is. Let me know how the music, if it's too loud, if the mic is okay. Yeah, so we're going to talk about the entire software developer interview process. I feel like it's very easy to feel nervous about it. It's a pretty complicated process, lots of different steps, lots of different rounds, right? It's very easy to feel very nervous about it. So I think it's important to kind of break it down, the different steps that are involved, what you might expect, what you should expect. All right, so let's just hop right into the topics. Okay, so usually what ends up happening is, right, you're very nervous on an interview process. You're about to have an interview, you're probably feeling very nervous. It's very normal to feel very nervous, right? Because what ends up happening is, you know that you're going to be getting a lot of rounds, you know you're going to be getting a lot of questions, you know that like it stands between you and like a really big job offer, right? That's basically what's kind of going through your mind. Now, the problem that I feel is the biggest hurdle between you and having a successful interview is yourself feeling nervous, right? Your lack of confidence. What ends up happening is if you get like a question that is otherwise a usually very simple question for you to answer, suddenly now because you're nervous, suddenly now you feel like, oh my gosh, I don't know this very basic answer, and it just totally escapes you, you stumble over your words, and then something that was very simple and something that you actually know really, really, really well, now you look like a total noob and you fail the entire process. And so personally, I feel like the best way to kind of solve that problem, the thing that actually helps you sort of get through that the most, is the actual preparation, meaning knowing what to expect, what type of questions you're going to get, the type of people you might talk to, what to prepare for. I think just kind of dealing with the unknown or making sure that there's as little unknown as possible is what ultimately really helps you feel confident and otherwise then nail your interview process. That's basically what I think is probably accurate. So with that in mind, let's kind of start breaking it down round by round. And of course, any questions that you have, just go ahead and pop them into the chat. I'll try to address those questions as they come up. Otherwise, I'm just going to kind of go through the individual rounds, what you can expect in each round, what are some things to do, what are some things not to do, the different variations that might come up, and otherwise prepare you for the best success that you have for your next interview process. The music is a bit too loud. Thank you, Jeff. I will turn that down. All right, let me know if that made a significant enough difference or if it needs to be lower. Just go ahead and let me know. Okay, so while we wait for Jeff to let me know if the music is any better, I'm going to continue moving on with the sort of first round that happens. So typically what happens is either you apply to a company or maybe a company reached out to you, whether it's on LinkedIn or something like Hired, which by the way, we can actually have a whole separate conversation about where I think are some of the best places to go and find job opportunities. But suffice it to say, at this point, you're already at that point where somebody is actually willing to talk to you. However you got there, you have a phone call set. Typically, the first phone call that you're going to have is going to be with like the recruiter from the company. So they could be a dedicated talent acquisition. Now, there's a whole separate side of it where you can actually talk to third-party recruiters that are going to like recruit on behalf of companies. Still a bit too loud. Okay, thank you, Jeff. I'm going to just go down a nice heap. Let me know if that helps. So, right. So basically, putting aside how you got here, you're now talking to somebody that works for the talent acquisition or sometimes the HR department within the company. Okay, perfect. So Usually the conversation will go a little something like this. They'll call you at a time that you and the recruiter have agreed upon. You'll get a phone call, and then usually they'll dive into right away talking a little bit about the company. So sometimes they may ask you, like, did you already do some research about the company, like what you already know? Now, this is a good time to try to show that you've already done some amount of research about the company, right? You don't want to like sound like you know nothing about the company. At a minimum, say, yeah, I've checked out your website. I noticed you guys are handling this particular problem. Even if it's just very, very cursory knowledge, try to indicate that you actually know something about the company. I do think that that's a pretty good signal to give them. So personally, what I like to do in an instance like that is if, let's say I'm asked, like, what do you already know about the company? I'll say I have done very cursory research. I have very cursory knowledge. This is what I know. And I'd be more than happy if you then go ahead and fill in any gaps that I have. And so this way I'm kind of absolved. I don't have to like know too much because I'm already indicating right now that I want to know more. But at the same time, I'm kind of showing them that I know something. I've done a little bit of research, so I'm kind of good in both ends. And then moving on from there, they'll then typically give you the whole spiel, the whole elevator pitch about the company, about what they're trying to do, what problem they're trying to solve, and all the different things, right? All very straightforward stuff. And then they'll kind of dive in a little bit more to the role, the technologies that you might be working with, and stuff like that. Finally, once all that's done, they'll typically hand the mic over to you, so to say, and now it's going to be your turn to kind of more or less talk about your background. And so typically the way this question goes is they're going to ask you something along the lines of like, so tell me a little bit about yourself. And now one very important thing to note about this question is you only have a certain amount of time for this conversation, usually 20 to 30 minutes tops for this conversation. So you want to make sure that you spend that time as as sort of efficiently as possible so that you gain the most amount of valuable information. Because believe it or not, even just this first phone call talking to the recruiter is a very, very important conversation, and I'll soon explain why. But the point that I'm trying to make is when you're asked this question, try not to kind of go into your life story because first of all, they don't care, right? They don't care about how many pets you have, whether you live here or whether you live there, what your hobbies are. All that doesn't really matter too much. Like you want to make a personal connection, that's fine, that can be helpful. But the most important thing to really dive into is your actual technical background. So are you currently graduating from college? Are you a bootcamp grad? Do you already have some experience? Have you been doing some freelance? What technologies are you good with? Stuff like that. That's more or less what people kind of want to know about. That's what you should really be spending most of your time talking about. That's way more important than your actual life story. So typically what I like to do when I'm asked this question, so like, when I'm talking about myself, I'll say something along the lines of the fact that I'm like a full stack JavaScript developer with a little bit more than 5 years of experience working in various different industries. I've got a lot of experience working with React on the front end as well as, Node on the back end with various different databases. I'll talk about the different databases I might have worked with, right? Actually, now the music is a little bit too loud for me. All right, that's better. So I'll talk about like the different databases that I might have worked with and things of that nature. And then what I also like to say now that I actually have this YouTube channel, which is a pretty good signal to have when you're trying to, impress your recruiter, I'll say, and another little aside is I've also got a channel that has a little over 9,000 subscribers, blah, 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 where I cover like programming tutorials. So everything that I've said is very relevant to the job at hand, to the conversation at hand. And then from there, I'm more than happy to kind of answer any more questions that they might have, like kind of diving into, tell me about this role, tell me about that role, tell me about your experience with this specific technology, tell me about your interest in that technology. They may have some follow-up questions, they may not, but the point is I have now specifically answered the question in a way that actually makes sense for the sort of subject matter of this particular conversation. So if that's good, let me know. I'll continue moving on to the sort of next top, questions that come up within this particular conversation. But in the meantime, if you have any questions about this particular answer, this particular question, definitely let me know. So with that, the next question that comes up a lot with this particular conversation, and this one is a bit of a tricky one, I'm going to admit. It's a tricky one. So you may be asked things along the lines of like your salary expectations. Now, there's a lot of different varying opinions when it comes to salary expectations, honestly. What I like to do is I like to talk about, let's see. So here's the problem. Here's the problem with salary expectations, right? People are afraid of you being the first one to kind of give a number. Because let's say the company, have I ever had issues getting Shabbos off? No, I've never had an issue with that specifically. That's a great question. I've never had an issue with that specifically. Instead, what ended up happening is one time I was working for a company where I specifically stressed that I have to have Fridays, getting off early, things like that. And everything went fine. I got the job. I started and I was clocking way less hours because this was a job where I had to actually clock my hours. And that's where the problem kind of happened. So I ended up clocking way less hours Friday afternoon. And maybe 5 months into me working at the job, I ended up getting a phone call from like, I think it was the CFO. So basically it's the guy that handles the money more or less. And he's like, you're supposed to be clocking more hours. And I'm like, I'm so confused. I thought I already had this conversation like way back when, and I've not been clocking these hours. He's like, well, everybody's expected to clock 8 hours even on Friday because that's how we bill our clients. I'm like, I understand that, but I can't do that. And I discussed this with you when we first started. So I ended up going to the COO, and she's like, it's cool, don't worry about it. And she kind of handled it. So that was like the closest thing that I had to a sort of hiccup with this. But definitely when you're working for companies where you're not even clocking hours, it becomes a lot easier, because then they're not really worried about hours. It's more or less, we're going to trust you to get your job done. If you work less hours on Friday and you need to make up for it, and you do make up for it, like you're responsible to get your work done, that's all that matters. So that's typically how it's worked for me. So kind of coming back to the salary question, I think the big trouble that people often have with the salary question is they don't want to be the first one to give a number. The fear is that a company might have in mind that they want to like offer you, I'm just going to throw some random numbers here, right? But they might have in mind they want to offer you like $200,000 a year, right? Now the problem is if you're going to go in and say, yeah, I'd like to have like around 150, well, you might have just joked yourself out of $50,000 a year. And so I agree that if you can get the company to be the first one to give the number, that's gold. Like that is probably the best thing that you could do. That's the safest way of making sure that you're not going to get joked out of, you know, a better salary than you could have potentially been getting. That being said, it's hard. I personally have never really had a lot of success with it. I personally don't have a lot of good tactics that I can really offer you for that. So I typically approach this in a very different way. And so far I have to say it's been working quite well for me. I've generally felt like I'm getting paid my market value. And so with that, this is what I typically do. I will do some research about how much I should be getting paid for my current tech stack based on my experience level, based on my location. So even with remote jobs, location still kind of matters. There are a decent amount of companies that will actually, you know, give you compensation based on your location, even though you're working remotely. So that definitely happens. It definitely kind of comes up. So with that, what ends up happening is I will then figure out, okay, let's say, and I'm going to throw a number again, just totally off whatever. Let's just say that I realize that for my current tech stack, my experience level, my location, I should be getting $50,000 a year, which is obviously a lot more than that, right? We all know that. So I'm just trying to make up some numbers. So let's just say that I say I realize it's $50,000 a year. So now I know, okay, fine. At a minimum, I don't want to get less than $50,000 a year. That is the minimum I'm willing to accept for this given job. Armed with that knowledge now, what I'll do is when I'm asked the question of salary, I'll say, okay, I'd like to have somewhere between $50,000 and say $75,000, $80,000 a year. So this will really do two things. Number one, it gives them an anchor point, which is basically saying that this is the lowest I'm willing to go. So usually companies are not going to offer you the lowest. In fact, I've only ever been offered the lowest once from a company, and I ended up accepting that offer, and I ended up regretting that, which is a whole separate story for another time. Maybe if we have time, I'll talk about that story as well. That only ever happened once. Usually companies will actually offer me either the higher end of my range, and in one case I've even been offered more than the highest number within my range. So this actually works really, really well for me. And so again, the idea basically is you give them the lowest number of your range, which is your absolute rock bottom, what I'm not willing to accept less than, and then you kind of go $20,000, $30,000 from there. And typically you'll fall in somewhere between that, and sometimes you might even get the actual upper number of your range. And the idea basically is companies want to say, like, if we really like you, if you're the type of person that we really, really like, and we want to make sure that we make you an offer that you're going to want to come and join us, we're not going to like play around. We're not going to give you some awful number, right? We're going to give you a good number. We want to prove to you that we really want you. And so that's basically been my experience. Now, could I potentially be getting even bigger salaries if I let the company give me the number first? Absolutely. I almost have no doubt that that's the case. But given how difficult it's been for me to kind of have that conversation, I'm not good with the money talk. I'll be honest, I'm not good at negotiating, not good at the money talk at all. This method has worked really well for me, and I'm basically happy with it. So if you find yourself in a situation where the money conversation is a little awkward for you, you kind of have a hard time with it, I think that maybe this is probably the best approach that you can take. Find out what your minimum is. Find out what you're worth, let that be your minimum, and then go from there around $25,000. Let that be your range. Because one other thing you never want to do is give them one single number. Like, you don't want to say, I want $50,000 a year. Like, you don't want to do that. It doesn't give them any room to play with, right? Instead, you want to have that range, which gives them a little bit more room to play with. So it doesn't make you seem as rigid and makes you seem more flexible, which ultimately makes it easier for them to kind of have negotiations with you. So, assuming there are no other questions on that particular topic, I'm going to move on to the next question. Let me know if there's any sort of questions on that topic. Actually, let me just check something really quickly. Alex, thank you so much. I honestly appreciate hearing that more than you know. It means a lot to me that my videos have been able to help you. So I very much appreciate you, popping in and just telling me that. Honestly, appreciate that. What if employer asks me my current salary? So that's a great question. In the beginning of my career, I used to answer this question. I used to get asked this question. I used to get answered this question. The honest answer is, it's, I think even at this point, maybe even outlawed. I'm not sure, but it's certainly unethical. And when you're asked that question, one of two things can happen. Either you can decide, you know what, like, wait a second, they shouldn't be asking me this, and then just take that as a giant red flag and kind of cut ties with the company. Or alternatively, it could be that it's just like an inexperienced recruiter and slips up and asks this question, and you want to give them the benefit of the doubt because everything else about the company seems okay. You're well within your right to say, I'm sorry, but I don't feel comfortable disclosing that. Now, if you get pressed on this, then that's already a very big, red flag, and definitely just jump ship, say, bye, I'm out. But if you like are asked that question, they say, I'm not comfortable disclosing that information, and then they just move on, it's a simple no harm, no foul situation, and that's exactly how I would handle it personally. I didn't handle this in the past when I was in the beginning of my career. I was naive and didn't know that I'm not supposed to be asked that question, but armed with the knowledge that that's a question you're not supposed to be asked, you can very easily bow out of that, and if you're pressed to answer anyway, then that's a great red flag that not for me, right? So, moving on from the conversation about salary then, right? Again, this is the approach that works for me. And if you have any other questions on that, feel free to leave them in the chat. I'll get back to them. The other sort of big important question that comes up within this conversation with the recruiter, this first conversation, now this is a big one. It's a difficult one to answer sometimes, especially when, okay, so let's first talk about what the question is. The question is, why are you looking to leave your current place of employment? Now, this is a very obvious question that you're going to get asked, right? And it can be very difficult to answer. So let's talk about a couple of scenarios. The first and obvious scenario is that you got laid off, right? So hopefully the reason why you got laid off was for a good reason, and then you'll have somebody that can still speak nicely about you, right? That would be ideal. You definitely want to be honest about this to the best of your abilities. Honesty during the interview process is super, super, super important, because if you're caught in a lie, it's an automatic rejection. You can get blacklisted. It's just not a road you want to go down at all. So you definitely want to try to be as honest as possible, and sometimes you'll be overlooked. Matter of fact, the company that I'm working for right now, I told them that the job before that I got laid off from, another story, we can talk about that later if y'all want to, but the point is I told them that I was honest about the fact that I got laid off, and it totally wasn't an issue. Honesty is a great way to go. Honesty is a great way to go, especially if the reason why you got laid off isn't something like, well, I stole from the company, right? That's a whole different thing between like getting fired for like sinister reasons or getting fired because somebody's trying to railroad you or the company ran out of funding. If it was just simply out of your control and you're just a good person, good developer, talented individual, there's no reason why this should harm you in any which way. So definitely be honest in terms of that. The other very important thing that kind of comes up with this particular question is you may get asked like why you want to leave your current place of employment, and you find yourself in a situation where the reason why you want to leave is because you have a manager that's just the worst, like an absolutely terrible person, or a company that's just very unethical, or coworkers that are just flat out awful. Whatever it is, you have really, really good, valid reasons about why you want to leave your current place of employment. The problem is those are things that are nobody else's business but your own. I don't know whether I agree with this or not, but this is the way it is. These are things that are basically big no-nos. You simply do not talk poorly about your current place of employment. You basically never, ever, ever do that. Again, it's kind of sad because if I have a really bad manager and that's the reason why I want to leave, I should be able to say that freely, but I can't, because if I do that, chances are that I'm going to be instantly rejected, because the thought process that the recruiter might have is, well, if you're bad-mouthing this company, who's to say you're not going to bad-mouth us and give us a bad reputation? So people are very worried about their reputations, right? So with that, I would say that definitely never, ever, ever badmouth your current place of employment. So then the question is, what can you do? So a little trick that I like to use for this, and I call it a trick, but it's really, I'm not like being dishonest, I'm still being very honest, but I basically answer the question without directly answering the question. So let me explain what I mean. Instead of talking about the reasons why I'm looking to leave my current place of employment, which would then force me to kind of speak ill of my current place of employment, I tend to try to focus on what it is that I'm looking forward to in the future. So in other words, if let's say I realize that the company that I'm working for or that I'm talking to right now, has I get the potential with them to maybe use some React, and I'm currently using Angular. Or maybe I'm currently working with legacy projects and there I get to work with greenfield projects. Or maybe I'm using REST API and here I get to use GraphQL. Whatever, you get the point. Or maybe I would get to manage other developers or learn from somebody better. Maybe they have somebody famous that you want to learn from. Whatever the case may be, you can use that as a reason why you're looking to leave. So in other words, when the question comes like, why are you looking to leave your current place of employment? Your answer can be, well, it's not so much that I'm looking to leave my current place of employment as it's more that I'm looking to kind of join your place or move on for this reason. And then you find some kind of valid reason that actually makes sense. Now, this, in my opinion, does two things. Number one, it does the obvious thing, is it now allows you to no longer speak poorly about your current place of employment. You kind of get to sort of dodge that question entirely. The other very important thing that this actually does is that moving forward now, you actually are giving them a very good signal that you're a person that has a certain growth mindset, because you're basically saying that I'm looking to join a new place because I want to get better at this, learn more about this, have this new responsibility. You have that growth mindset, which is always a very good thing to kind of indicate to your future employer whenever that opportunity arises. And so still a very valid answer. Doesn't mean that you're lying, and it doesn't mean you have to speak poorly about your current place of employment. And most importantly, it's a very good positive signal to indicate during the interview process. And usually that about concludes the entire recruiter process, the entire recruiter phone call, except for one thing actually, which is I think very important to talk about. Definitely during this particular phone call, try as much as possible to actually ask about the interview process. You want to know what else you can expect, right? That's kind of the whole goal of this whole stream, and the whole goal of these conversations is let's try to understand what's coming down the line so we know how to be best prepared, because the unknown is where a lot of the nerves come from. And nerves is how you can really kind of falter in your interviews. Suddenly simple questions become complicated. We want to eliminate the nerves as much as possible. And in my opinion, that comes from simply being prepared. And being prepared comes by asking these questions. So definitely ask them about what the next what the process is. Sometimes they offer this information because they also try to make it as smooth as possible for you. They want you to have a good interview experience because they don't want you to go on Glassdoor and then badmouth them. Again, companies really value their reputation just as much as you as an individual values your reputation. So they don't want you to badmouth them. So that being said, you're going to definitely have it where, they're going to try to offer this information so that you have a good experience. All right, 1 second. So, any questions on anything that I'm saying so far? I'm curious. I'm just kind of rambling on, not getting a lot of questions. Just curious if everything that I'm saying is clear or if we're kind of good to move on. I will move on in the meantime, but if there's any questions, just go ahead and feel free to pop them in the chat. Okay, so if after you are done with the recruiter conversation, typically the next round is going to be, there's a couple of variations here, so let's talk about the different variations. The first variation is the more technical one, where you actually are going to get a tech screening. Now, this can be done in multiple different ways, right? So you'll have the 30-minute tech screen where you'll be paired up with like one of the sort of senior engineers at the company. You'll be given like a CoderPad link or sometimes even a Google Doc, right? That could definitely happen. You'll have like a Zoom chat or a Google Meet or something like that, and now you're going to be forced to sort of solve some kind of problem in whatever environment it's going to be. Now, of course, within that, there are definitely many different variations that kind of come up. You can be asked to sort of solve more practical problems. You could be asked to solve more algorithmic type problems. You could be asked to solve your problem in an environment where the code can actually be executed, or you can be asked to solve your code in an environment where the code can't be executed, like a Google Doc. I've definitely had all of those scenarios. So some of the things that I personally like to do to make sure that I have the best chances at success is I like to know what kind of interviews I personally do well in, and know what type of interviews I don't do well in. So here's what I know about myself. I don't do well in algorithmic type interviews, and I don't do well in interviews where I basically am writing code in an environment where it cannot be executed. Now, typically those two things kind of go hand in hand. Typically when you're being asked to write code in an environment where the code can't be executed, it's typically also algorithmic type questions. So those types of things usually go hand in hand. But I try to suss this out from the recruiter as much as possible. Like, what kind of questions am I going to be asked? Will it be puzzles, riddles, coding challenges? Or am I going to be asked to build something practical, right? And I actually have already had it where, the recruiter told me that it's, some sort of algorithm that I'm going to be solving. And I said, okay, this process is not for me. And I just kind of ended it right there. And that was the end of it. Because I know I'm not going to do well in those. No reason to kind of set myself up for failure. Does that mean that I can't get a job with Fang? Yes, it does. Does that bother me? No, it doesn't. Because I'm very happy with where I'm currently working. So if you're okay with like waiting for those types of companies that ask the kind of questions that you want to kind of answer, right? You don't want to have to like get the algorithmic riddle, what's it called again? The algorithmic lottery, right? If you don't want that, then you can totally suss that out. Again, if you study this types of stuff, if you're good at it, then by all means. If it doesn't make a difference to you, then this whole conversation is kind of null and void. But a lot of us I know don't like being asked those types of questions, and so you can very easily suss these types of questions out by just asking some basic questions. And I hate interviews. I know I'm not good at them, but I do hate the feeling of being evaluated and need to prove something. Yeah. So that's a very good point, Daniel. Thank you so much for that comment. I think that's a very good point, is that sometimes interviewers will make it so that you feel like you're being evaluated versus it being more collaborative. Typically, all the jobs that I've had that I've liked the most and the interview process was the best was where I was actually feeling like the process was not so much evaluative, meaning I wasn't feeling like I'm being evaluated as much as I was feeling like it was more collaborative. So that's a very, very good point. And typically those happen not when I'm writing algorithms. I was either having just a simple tech conversation. I actually was once offered a 4-month contract gig with Mozilla. That interview process was not technical in the sense that I wasn't writing any weird algorithms. I was just having a simple conversation with one of the senior engineers talking about React with Redux, sagas, thunks, that whole shebang. Great conversation. Ended up getting the offer, but I ended up not taking it for other reasons, but great conversation. The job that I have now, not going to get into that too much because I signed an NDA. And then the other companies that I've worked for that I've really enjoyed, I've also had very sort of more collaborative type fun conversations, even while writing code, 100%. And you can totally suss that out. I think I might. Yes, I definitely can see myself staying in my current place of employment for a long time. I'm very happy with it so far. I've only been there for about a month. But the team, the culture, the people, lots to learn from. It's one of the biggest technological companies I've ever worked for, so there's a lot to learn. Yeah, absolutely. For the size of company that it is, it's very chilled. I absolutely love it, honestly. I can see myself definitely being anchored here for a while and kind of growing up with the company for sure. So in terms of like questions that you might get asked, right? So we've already discussed the sort of coder pad, algorithmic type questions that you might get. If you like that, this will be easy. It's a 30-minute conversation. You're usually going to be asked to solve one or maybe two problems. Sometimes it'll be one problem, and then you're going to be asked to sort of optimize it more and more, or it kind of like grows in complexity. However they want to do it, that's easy. The other thing that can happen is you will be sort of having a more like a 45-minute to an hour type long interview where you're going to be asked to kind of build something. So for example, I've had it in two scenarios that I can remember off the top of my head where I was in a code sandbox and I was given some React code. I was either asked to like take the existing code, fix it, and then add some more features on it. Actually, I had that exact scenario twice with two different companies. Both companies ended up going the distance with them. Great interview process it was for me personally for the sort of second round. So those are the type of things that I like a lot more. I had a different company a couple of months back with like a government contract company. Ended up not taking that offer either. But also I was basically given a Node project, had an API in front of me. One of them wasn't working. One of them needed to be fixed. One of them needed some added features. One of them needed some pagination added into it. Even though there were two people interviewing at the same time, I didn't feel like I'm being judged or evaluated. It was very collaborative. I was writing real code. It mimicked a real life scenario. It was great. I love those types of questions. Those are awesome. Those are honestly awesome. And the way I see it is that's basically the second type of interview that you might come across during this sort of screening round. Another type of interview that comes up during the screening round is the more conversational type. And so this will basically be more of along the lines of like, you have bullet points in your resume, like you worked at this company using this technology, solving this problem. Let's talk about that. So you might be asked like, tell me a problem that you solved that whatever. Tell me something you're proud of that you did. It doesn't matter where or what, but it can sometimes be off of your resume. So they may prompt you based on something on your resume, or sometimes it'll just be like a free open-ended question. Tell me something that you did that you're proud of. And those are other questions that I truly, truly enjoy, especially if you've done some really fun side projects, or even if you've done some projects that you can talk about, things you've done at work, things that you can talk about that you're really proud of. These are a lot of fun because you actually get to really show off. You get to say, yeah, I was, faced with this really difficult problem, very tough to solve it, and this is what I did, and I'm really proud of the solution, and it ended up solving the problem, and blah, 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 blah. So it's really, really great. Now, a couple of caveats that I should point out with this particular question is that you could get kind of hung up if you don't really fully know what you're talking about. So for example, when you're going to choose something that you want to talk about, you want to make sure that you can kind of go deep as much as possible for your skill level and for your seniority level, however much exposure you had to the sort of depth of that particular topic. You want to make sure that you can go deep. Because, and by the way, this can also talk about a project that you did at a boot camp or during your schoolwork, whatever it is, whatever your background may be, whatever project you worked on that you can talk about, choose that as something that you're proud of to then talk about, but make sure that you can go deep on the topic. So for me, I remember I once had this where I wanted to talk about my WebRTC stuff, right? Obviously, I'm proud of it. I think the fact that I figured out how to build a mesh network and then, have a 4-way video chat, which is with WebRTC, I think that's kind of cool. And of course, I talk about that whenever I'm asked this type of question. I can go relatively deep on that particular topic. I have my big limitations on WebRTC, But I find that the depth that I have is typically enough to kind of impress enough to kind of get through that particular type of question. And I'm often asked like, okay, like how would you handle this problem? How would you handle that problem? And then we kind of go and have a conversation around it. It's usually a very, very good conversation. If you're asked that type of question, it's definitely very awesome. And then finally, I think the fourth and final thing that I can think of, and again, any questions along the way about what anything that I've just said, even if I'm jumping on to the next question, feel free to drop your questions in chat. I'll get back to them. It's okay. Should take another sip of my tea real quick. Hope you're all enjoying the stream so far. Okay, so the fourth and sort of final process, I guess, or the type of way that you might be getting asked questions during your interview process for the second round is the take-home assignment. Now, the take-home assignment is a big mixed bag. So let's first talk about the pros. With a take-home assignment, almost always, there are times where you get like a link to like HackerRank, and then you're meant to like solve some HackerRank problems on your own time, which is basically like lead code algorithm type problems on your own time. That's kind of like the fake version of a take-home assignment because you have a strict time limit. You're still solving algorithms. It's not a lot of fun. Again, if you like that kind of stuff, then that's awesome for you. But for the most part, take-home assignments are basically you're given some sort of requirement like build me an application that can do X, Y, and Z. The requirements can vary depending on how much time they want you to sink into it. Sometimes it could be something that will only take you an hour. And I've had one that took me, I think, 10 hours, right? And ended up getting that offer as well. Ended up backing out of that one. Long story. We can talk about it some other time. In fact, I think I made a video about that one actually. But the point is that take-home assignments are definitely a lot of fun because you are going to be writing code on your own time, in your own IDE. No one's watching you. No one's over your shoulder. You're certainly not going to feel evaluated. You get to do things your own way. I have had some instances where people would be like, I want you to build this, but you could only use technology X, Y, or Z. A little strange. Not sure why they care so much, but that doesn't happen too often. For the most part, they're basically just like, build this, get it done, and then show us your code, right? So I'm a very big fan of this for many obvious reasons. I think that all the problems that I typically suffer from when it comes to the interview process, like getting those weird algorithmic type puzzles or riddles, this eliminates that. I get to do what I do every single day, build projects, and I get to do it and show somebody what I'm actually capable of. This is what I'm showing you that I'm good at. This is what I'm going to do at the job. This is what I'm trying to get hired for. I'm getting to actually show the exact skill that I'm getting evaluated for. So I personally love those. However, it's very, very obvious the sort of big problem that can in fact exist with this particular interview style, right? These types of questions can be very long, right? You can sometimes have some that can take even a week to finish. And this is you working a full-time job potentially, or even if you're searching for a job, that in itself could be a full-time job. And on top of that, you have a lot of other interviews, a lot of other companies. And with that, you're still having to like work on this particular project. It's a lot. It's a lot. And it takes a massive time investment. So the sort of flip side is that, you know, you get to have a type of question that is going to mimic the real world of what you're going to do for your job potentially, but it can be a massive time suck. So some companies try to combat this by giving you a sort of time limit. They'll say like, you know what, only take 4 hours on this, only take 2 hours, however they might time box it, however much time they get. Obviously now that causes its own set of issues because part of the allure, in my opinion, of having a take-home assignment is that you get to do it at your own pace. But now that's kind of going away because when you sit down to do it, you have to make sure you get it done in that amount of time. Is talking bad about one of your previous employers necessarily a bad idea? Yes. Yes, it is. I personally, when I was going through the beginnings of my career and I wanted to know more about the interview process, that is what everyone told me. That is definitely the sort of understood mindset that it's an instant rejection. It's a very poor look and something you should absolutely not do. Do I agree with that mindset? No. I think that you should be able to talk poorly if you have a good reason. Like if the place is outright toxic and you're being worked to a bone, or your manager was just like awful or whatever, they're very unethical, whatever valid reason you have, I feel like you should be able to talk about that 100%. But it is a bad idea from everything that I know. I would personally not recommend it, but if you do try it, I would love to know your results, honestly. Now, in terms of the take-home assignment, right? The fact that they give you a time limit, I think is also in itself a mixed bag because it takes away some of that really beneficial part of you having a take-home assignment. And now you're once again in a situation where you have to force yourself to get it done by a certain amount of time, you're suddenly feeling washed all over again. So like I said, take-home assignment is definitely a very mixed bag. It definitely has its pros, definitely has its cons. That more or less concludes the sort of second round. So we've already talked about the recruiter round. We've talked about the second round, which is the screen round that I like to call it. If all that goes well, you then go to the sort of on-site round, the final round, which nowadays in this world that we live in is almost always going to be a virtual on-site, but the basic idea is still going to be the same. Now within this, I've also seen a good fair bit of different variations that kind of come up with it. So almost always the on-site, the virtual on-site nowadays is going to be 4 to 5 hours long. It's usually not less. I've had it where it was like only an hour and a half, but for the most part, I think generally speaking, it's around 4 to 4.5 hours, right? So usually the way that it works is you're going to be given one Zoom link or potentially one Google Meet link, depending on what the company uses. That's going to be your home base for the next 4 hours or so. And then your interviews are just going to kind of cycle in and out on every sort of 45 minute to an hour interval, depending on how long they want to talk to you. The types of questions that you get asked here can vary very widely. So some companies will make it completely non-technical, like purely cultural, just kind of like you've already gone through the screen round, you've already had like your take-home assignment or your whatever algorithm or your whatever you've done. You've proven that you can code. Now we want to get to know you as an individual. Are you a good teammate? And so that is something that can definitely be talked about a lot during this particular interview round. And it's totally not technical. All people, so you talk to like the manager, or the CTO, the designer, maybe even sometimes a junior developer. Just talk to a lot of different people that you might be interacting with. They just want to get a feel like, how are you as a person? How are you as a teammate? Can we get along with you? What's your culture like? A lot of cultural evaluation happens. That's definitely a process that companies do. Not all companies do this, but I've definitely had this particular process as well. Another process that exists within this is a kind of hybrid. So you'll have like some technical rounds, and then within those technical rounds, like what to expect, you can kind of refer back to the screening round, meaning you could either be asked to build something practically. In this case, it wouldn't be a take home, but you'd be like peer programming to build something practically. You might solve an algorithmic problem or something along those lines. So a lot of the sort of same things that happen within a second round would happen here as well. In fact, if let's say you actually did a take-home assignment for your second round, you may be asked to either add more features onto your take-home assignment, or maybe like code review it together, or maybe add some tests to it, or whatever they want to do with it, but you may be added to like augment the sort of take-home assignment. So that's a definite type of question that comes up. Another very common question in the technical realm of the on-site is the sort of system design question. So this could be a full stack system design, back-end only system design, front-end system design. But the point is, you're going to basically be asked, given this requirement from A to Z, how would you build it? What are all the different components involved? This is another great question personally that I love talking about. It lets you really talk about a lot of different things. You kind of get to talk about the depth and breadth of your knowledge all in one conversation. Lots of fun little puzzles get thrown at you, like you might handle this thing one way, but then you didn't think about this edge case, and so then your interviewer's gonna say, wait, you didn't think about that, and now you gotta go solve for that, which leaves you a hole here. It becomes a lot of fun, so you really gotta get to have a really fun technical conversation that really kind of, reaches pretty widely. So that's definitely a lot of fun. So we've already said you could have algorithms, you could have practical applications, you could have an augmentation of your take-home assignment, and you could have the system design question. That kind of sums up the sort of technical rounds that come up within the sort of virtual on-site. Another very important conversation to keep in mind that you may be having, and this is especially true if you're a front-end developer, is you may actually talk to a designer, right? And so if you're a front-end developer talking to a designer, one of the most important things that they want to know about is, how do you deal with conflict? Because often developers and designers don't see eye to eye. You're going to have a lot of debates, and they want to make sure that you're going to have... Thank you, Jozo. I definitely appreciate that. Thank you so much. So the designers want to make sure that you're going to get along with them, because you're going to definitely have debates, right? You're not going to agree. And they want to make sure that it's going to be a debate and not so much like an argument. They want to make sure that you're not argumentative. That's super, super, super important. And outside of that, you're just going to have some basic conversations, a lot of behavioral type questions maybe. So you might have somebody from like HR have like a behavioral question with you, like, tell me a time that you had a conflict with the coworker. Tell me a time that you couldn't meet a certain deadline. Tell me a time that you had to delegate some work. Tell me a time that you had to push back against your manager. All very basic stuff. Ideally, you want to have some stories lining up, but it's basically if you've already worked any job, then you mostly already have answers to all these questions. If you haven't already worked a job, like if this is your first job, there's a very good chance you won't even get asked these questions, right? So I wouldn't worry about it too much. And more or less, that basically sums up the virtual onsite as well. If that goes well, now comes your offer. So you might get reference checks, then an offer. You might get an offer, then reference checks, which I've definitely seen. Don't ask me why they'd give you an offer, then do the reference checks, background check, and that's pretty much it. I mean, congratulations that you made it that far. At this point, you now have an offer. So again, the whole idea is to make sure that you know what to expect. At every step of the way, try to suss out what to expect. And then basically, once you know the type of interview that it is, you can determine whether it's the type that you would do well in, whether you want to endure something that you won't do well in, but you'll do it anyway, and then how to prepare for it. The goal is make sure that you're prepared. Preparation combats the nerves, and when you're nervous, that's when you fail interviews. When you're confident and you know your stuff, that's when you do well. Confidence matters. It really, truly does matter. So that's pretty much all I've got on the topic. I'm open to any and all questions that you all might have regarding this or anything else that you want to talk about. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and call it a night. So I'll just wait a minute or two, see if you have any questions kind of rolling in on anything that we talked about. And yeah, let me know. So actually, one thing that I want to ask all of you that are still here, in the future, when I do another stream, I might do another one this week, or I might just, I'm not sure yet what my schedule is going to be with streaming. I'm honestly still figuring this out. But if I do a stream, how much would you stay with the company? How much would you stay with the company? Are you asking like how long would I stay with the company? If you're asking how long you would stay with the company, here's the truth, okay? The truth of the matter is, you will always earn more money by jumping. That's the fact of our industry. That being said, yes, Lewis, I'm working remote. Yeah, this is where I'm basically always. This is my streaming YouTube workstation, my regular workstation. My gaming setup is right there. This is definitely it. Yeah, so in terms of how long I would stay for a company, again, it's just a fact. You'll always get more by jumping. That's just a fact. But when you're already at a place that you like, and the only reason why you want to leave is because of money, one of two things are true. Either you're not only wanting to leave because of money, or you need to ask yourself, am I happy enough that I'm willing to just take the pay that I'm taking, even though I know I can get $20,000, $30,000 more by the next place? Because you never know what's waiting for you around the corner. Sometimes better the devil that you know than the devil that you don't know. That's just, I'm not saying that your current place is the devil, right? That's not my point. But definitely be wary of that. When you're leaving, make sure that you're trying to leave for more than just reasons of money. And so that doesn't directly answer your question. I think the point is that it really much depends, right? If you're by a place where you're honestly not that happy, then you can stay 6 months, a year, right? Whatever, you want to make sure that you don't have your resume looking like you're bouncing around. So people, basically the question that you want to avoid is why have you been so little by that current company? And so if you have like 2 companies on your resume that you've only been there for like 6 months each, that can be raise a flag. So you have to kind of think about that as well. So if you're by a place that you don't like and you just recently left a place after 6 months, maybe try to endure it for a year and a half, maybe even 2 years, even though you don't necessarily like it, because it's harder to then have an attractive resume when you are potentially jumping jobs a little bit too much. So again, that's just something to kind of think about. Otherwise, stay as long as you're happy there. Honestly, stay as long as you're happy there. But always keep in mind, you'll definitely get a lot more when you jump to another company. That's just a fact of life. I don't know why that is, but that is definitely just a fact of life. All right, 1 second. Just trying to deal with something here real quick. Yeah, but you guys, if you have any other questions, let me know. I'm here. Absolutely, Jeff. My absolute pleasure. Hope you actually find this useful. Yeah, and also thanks for the tips with the music. Yeah, so what I was going to ask actually is if I do decide to do more streams, which I just want to know like what kind of topics. Like I'm just trying to gather some feedback of like what kind of topics are people interested in. Do we want more chill streams like this where not a lot of coding, just talking about a topic, or do you want more coding streams? And if they are coding streams, any specific things you want to see? And by the way, this can also apply to video topics. If you have specific things you want me to like cover in videos, I'm more than happy to like take a look at a minimum. So yeah, I'm open to ideas. Should you take the first job offer or keep waiting for a certain salary? So that's a very, very good question. The answer is it depends on many different factors. So let's first talk about scenario A. Scenario A is you are right out of college or right out of a boot camp. You have no other income. And this is your first job that comes along, so you also don't have any experience. Assuming that the salary can make you make ends meet for the next year, then absolutely take it, right? Absolutely take it. There's a caveat there. But assuming that you can actually make ends meet with this particular salary, you have no other experience and you have no other income, definitely take it. Okay. Now, when I say no other income, I should really say if you have no other way of making ends meet. Like for example, if let's say you're sitting in a pretty fat savings account and you can live for the next 6 months just off of your savings and then wait for a better job to come around, then do that by all means. It really comes down to how long can you hold out for that next sort of job offer. The other scenario that might, and just the caveat really quickly, the caveat on that is if you're going to be taking a job with technologies that are basically dead, right? Like literally have almost no shelf life, no one's using them anymore, you need to ask yourself whether or not you want to do this. Obviously, programming knowledge will transfer regardless of like what you're working on. So programming knowledge is programming knowledge. That's definitely helpful. That being said, if somebody looks at your resume and sees you've only ever worked with Elm, which I think is kind of dead now. If it's a bad example, I apologize, but just kind of go with me. So I don't know what's going on with the music right now. But basically, if let's say it's something that's kind of dead, then I wouldn't necessarily jump on it so fast because you have to think about your next job after that. Sorry, Jeff, I'll get to that in just a second. Victoria, so Victoria, the other point that I will say is the other scenario is if let's say you're already working for a current place and you're not happy, but you can hold out, then yeah, I mean, you might as well wait a little bit. Right? It's so, I think, and what now that I'm noticing as I'm kind of answering your question, the sort of common denominator is it's all about your pain threshold, whether your pain is your current place of employment and that's your motivation to look, or whether you just can't make ends meet and that's your motivation to look. It comes down to your own individual pain threshold and whether or not the current offer coming in is good enough, right? If the current offer is good enough, like if it's what you wanted. So for context, I talked a little bit earlier about like getting like I talked a little bit about like getting the question of like how much you want to get for salary. So if you know what your minimum base salary is that you need, and if your offer either meets or exceeds that, then go for it, assuming that you really don't like your job or don't have any other, income. So it really comes down to your sort of pain tolerance, I would say. So hopefully that answers your question. Let me know. Jeff says, would love to watch something, a mock interview, coding plus explaining thought process. Absolutely. I do love doing mock interviews. I will probably, in the next coming weeks, start putting out community posts where I make it known that I plan on doing a mock interview, and I'm going to, give you some kind of system about how you can reach out to me to sign up if you want to be the one to do the mock interview. So definitely something that we will probably be doing in the future. I love doing that. Joseph says, great. Would you look for a new job while working at a previous job, or quit and then look for a new job? That is a great question. It again comes down to similar to what I told Victoria, or how I answered Victoria, is it really comes down to your pain threshold. It's always easier to be able to do a job search full time as opposed to having to juggle between your actual job and then working full time. There's two problems however, that it poses when you leave your job to then go look for a job. Two problems that it poses. The obvious problem is you're now not getting any money. Can you withstand? Because you don't know how long this is going to be. It could take a month. It could take a year. It depends on your experience level, depends on your market, depends on where you live, depends on your technology stack, what you're looking for. You could just be unlucky. You could be bad at interviewing. There's just a lot of factors involved. So it's hard to know how long it's going to actually take you. But if past experience shows you that it's only going to take you around 6 weeks and you can last 6 weeks, that's a pretty good indication that you should do it. The other thing to be mindful of is that this now creates a job gap on your resume. Job gaps are something that you have to explain. Now, if when you're given the chance to explain a job gap, saying that I left to go look for a new job is a very easy explanation. The problem is sometimes somebody screening your resume sees a job gap and won't even give you the chance to explain it, which is just very unfortunate, but you can be rejected purely based on the fact that you have a job gap without even given the chance to explain it. So just something to kind of keep in mind. So again, it's one of those answers where it kind of depends, but these are, I think, the factors that it depends on. And Mia says, or a front-end system design mock interview video. Front-end system design. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, Mia? That's an interesting one. I'm not sure what you mean by that. I would definitely love to know a little bit more about what you're referring to there. I'm not 100% sure I understand what you mean there. And any of the other questions that I've answered, if I wasn't clear or if there's any follow-up questions, definitely let me know. Well, thank you, Victoria. Thank you so much. Welcome to the channel. By the way, let me know if you subscribed. Did you actually get like some kind of alert? I tried setting it up, but I don't know if they happened or not. So just curious. Okay, so I just noticed that there's like a little bit of like some frames dropping. I'm hoping that the stream is cleaning up a little bit now. Let's see. Okay, Jozo asks, have I ever burnt out? Is burnout real? Yes. How am I going to answer this? So the answer is yes, burnout is real. Yes, I have burnt out. That being said, I think that burnout is not so much on the individual as it pertains to your job. Meaning, I think that people sometimes feel, and this could happen for others. This has never happened to me. I think sometimes people feel that developers just burn out from development in general, and then nothing is of interest to you. Like you don't want to do side projects, you don't want to do any work, you don't want to work for any company, you just want to become a farmer, right? You've probably seen that idea on Twitter where I just want to become a farmer, right? That happens all the time. Personally, I've never felt that way. I think for me, whenever I felt burnt out, it wasn't so much that I was burnt out, rather I was checked out of my company. So I was working for a place, things just started not going the right way, like I wasn't happy for whatever reasons they were, and I started getting checked out. So to me, I was like not interested in my job. So I wasn't interested in doing my tasks, wasn't interested in my teammates anymore, just started getting checked out and started looking for other things. To me, that felt like burnout, but I myself was still very interested in the profession, software, building side projects. Absolutely. So burnout. So when I say burnout, for me, it was more on the sort of company level versus on the individual me being burnt out from software in general. Hopefully that answers your question. Abdullah asks, do I have much negotiation power and salary from my recent grad looking for my first job? Not much, but you probably have some. I think that from my experience, I will tell you that there's always at least $5,000 or $10,000 that you can ask for more. I myself have had it where I asked for like $5,000 more and I got it. A good friend of mine was offered a little bit less, asked for like $5,000 more and he got it. So yeah, definitely, there's definitely that possibility, right? There's definitely that possibility that you can ask for more, but given that you're just a recent grad, you don't have a lot of negotiation power. So definitely keep that in mind, because unless if you're only competing with other recent grads, in which case if you're the best candidate and they want to hire you and not the other person, then you have all the bargaining power in the world. But if you're competing against, let's say the situation is where they say, okay, we can go with a cheaper person or the more expensive person that has more experience, but you have less experience and that's why you're cheaper, they may say, okay, I'll go with the cheaper person that has less experience. The problem now is if you start negotiating, well, suddenly you just became more expensive and have given them no reason to go with you versus the more experienced person. It's unlikely that that's the case, but I would still say start leveraging your negotiation power after you have more experience. When you have no experience, definitely take almost what comes your way, because the most important thing that I have found that opens all the doors for you is experience. Once you have 1 or 2 years of experience, That opens all the doors. All right. Next question. I don't know either, but I'm searching. Is the process of designing the elements of a system such that the architecture modules and components and different interfaces of those components and data goes through the system? Example would be, how would you design Twitter? I have an interview that would have a design. Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Oh, so you mean like system design? Yes, Mia. I definitely love that. Definitely love that. I think we should definitely do a system design interview. Might do that as a live stream and a mock interview, maybe. That's a great one. Yes, Mia. 100%. We're going to do that. Peaky. That name makes me laugh. I don't know why. The future of JS and web development. I personally don't have much of an opinion on this, to be honest. I personally think that even with a lot of the sort of advances in things like, AI, things like machine learning, things like data science and things like that, at the end of the day, all of that data needs to be displayed. It needs to be right. Even right now, a lot of companies already are leveraging big data and they're doing some really cool things with it. In fact, a lot of companies that I spoke to during my last round of interviews were companies that I have nothing to do with machine learning or AI or anything like that. And I'm having conversations with these companies because at the end of the day, they still need web developers. They still need JavaScript developers. They still need React developers. All that data is meaningless unless if it can't be consumed by an end user in most cases. So in most cases, you have all this data, you have all these models, all this cool predictive stuff that you can do with your data, but you want to be able to display that. So you need to build an API that can query that data, build a UI that can display that data. You're still very much going to be in demand even in the current climate. And I think that that's going to hold true for the next little while as well. That's my opinion. I could be very wrong on that, but it's what I'm noticing so far. And I don't really see any reason why that should change in the future. Let me know if that answers your question or maybe if you had something else in mind. Keep the questions coming. These are definitely awesome questions. I love the idea of doing a mock interview. Jiffy has a great question, great channel. Can you discuss what to look out for looking for your new job, red flags, etc.? Yes, that's actually a very, very good question. So I think some things to look out for are if you see a company that says you need to be a self-starter, or that you have to be self-motivated and things like that, in my opinion, that often means that you have a lazy manager. You shouldn't have to figure out your tasks yourself. You should be having somebody that helps you figure out what you should do. 100%, that to me is a red flag. Another red flag is when they say we're like family. I know Joshua Fluke talks about this a lot, but you're not family. You won't give it second thoughts to let me go if there's not enough money to pay me, right? So definitely they need to understand the boundary between employee and employer, right? It's okay to have a relationship, have some sort of camaraderie, getting along, all very important, but don't try to sell me on the fact that we're family, because that's just not the case. So to me, that's another very big red flag that I definitely don't like. Another thing is the whole we've got ping pong tables and beer and whatever and all those perks. It's cool, but if because of that I'm gonna get paid less, I'm not interested, right? So hopefully that answers your question, Shiffy. Let me know. Jozo, I've heard AI would take over front end, so I've heard about don't go into front end. I don't know. It would take over by AI, but though I'm thinking, why wouldn't all equally take over portions of back end? So when people say this can take over front end, I'm not sure what they mean. Are they saying that things like Copilot will make it so that you can just start writing, that your Copilot can build out front ends? Obviously, we know that that's currently not the case, and I think that that's never really going to be the case, right? Because at the end of the day, yeah, I just don't see that happening. I really just don't see that happening. What's going on? Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, given the fact that I think it's written in Arabic, but what is up to you as well? Thank you so much for stopping by. Yeah, Joseph, I don't think that it's going to ever happen. Honestly, I don't think it's ever going to happen, but maybe I'm just being overly optimistic, but I just don't see that as being the case. Certainly not in the near future. Not in the near future. And it definitely, for the next 10 years, you have no reason to think that front end is not the way to go. Right? That's my opinion. Lewis, do you ever want to be self-employed? Yes and no, right? I think for me personally, the perfect balance is between having a really good job and having enough of a side hustle like this channel so that I have something else kind of coming in on the side. But that being said, I like nothing gives you security. You don't have security in a job and you don't have security when you're self-employed, I just feel like it's easier to feel like you have a security blanket when you're working for a job because it's somebody else's headache to figure out where their money comes from. Right? When it's somebody else's headache to figure out where the money comes from and it's not your headache, you're not sweating it as much. You just know that you're going to get your paycheck, right? So for me personally, I feel like right now this is the perfect sort of setup for me where I've got a really good job that I'm very happy with. And I've also got a great channel. So I'm really happy with that. Will I make a media soup course? Yes. In the very far future though. In fact, tonight's stream was potentially going to be about WebRTC, but I'm kind of thinking about taking a break on WebRTC for a while. I want to explore a lot of other things. I'm not bored of WebRTC. I love WebRTC, and I don't think I'll ever be bored of it, but I definitely want to explore some other things. I think I'm going to take a break for now with WebRTC. How do you approach salary negotiations? I know nothing about this. That's a great question. I don't have a lot of good tips on salary negotiations, even though I've been in the industry for several years now. I don't have a lot of good tips because I myself am, I guess you could say, a chicken. I don't feel comfortable talking about salary at all. I really am not. The only time I've ever negotiated salary was when I had one offer in hand and another offer in hand. So I actually had two competing offers. And so I went back to the first company and said, listen, I have this really great offer. What can you counter? And then they ended up raising me an extra $5,000, but it was still less than the other really great offer. And so I kind of backed out. So with that being said, I think with that being said, my approach to negotiation is if you have a strong hand, negotiate. If you have a bluffed hand, don't negotiate. That's basically how I've always felt. Meaning, if I know for a fact that the worst case, they don't want to negotiate, I have a really solid fallback plan, then I negotiate like crazy. Because I've got nothing to lose, right? Because I've got a really solid fallback plan. But if I feel like I'm negotiating out of thin air, but the chances are they can pull the rug and I'm left with nothing, I never take that risk. Even though I probably should. Most people will tell you that you should take that kind of risk. I'm personally too chicken to do that. So for me, negotiations are, you got a good hand, use it. You don't have a good hand, take what you get. That's been my mindset, but I will admit, it's probably the wrong mindset. What do you do when you finish your work and there's nothing to do? So it doesn't happen often, right? In most cases, there's always a lot of work to go around. But when I do have a lull in work, I always try to focus on leveling myself up. So for me, a big motivation of having this channel in general was, besides for actually making content that actually helps people, like, two people have already, jumped in here and told me that my content has helped them. And that's why I do this. That's why I love doing this. But the selfish reason of why I do this as well is because talking about these things are ways for me to level myself up. And so sometimes I need to have content to talk about. So I have to go and research the content to talk about. So if I have a lull, I will then go look at something like, hey, I wonder how this particular thing works. Start reading some documentation, maybe whip up a work in project, a work in progress type idea, proof of concept. Maybe check the analytics and see whether this would make for a good video. So my channel has definitely allowed me to fill up those gaps in time where I've got lulls, because I'm always thinking like, I have a reason to go look for new content, and in so doing, I level myself up. So that's just for me personally been a great motivation. So like if you blog or make YouTube videos, you can more or less do the same thing as well. Hopefully that answers that. Yeah, so that's a sensible approach, but I just don't know if negotiating only when you have a strong hand is the right thing to do. A friend of mine just negotiated himself an extra $5,000 a year, even though he didn't have any hand, and it worked for him and he still got it. So again, it's hard to say that it's the right thing to do. Is it sensible? I guess sensible is the right word, but I don't know if it's right. How should I go about my first 6 months to impress my manager at a cloud support engineer role? So I don't know the specifics of a cloud support engineer and what the job is, but in terms of just impressing your manager, there's a very good tweet that I've recently seen, which I take very much to heart, is that the way that you make yourself hard to replace is not by how hard you work, right? But by how much knowledge you have. So in other words, when you're joining a company for the first 6 months, the best thing that you can do is get as much domain knowledge around whatever it is that you're working on, so that if they have to let you go for whatever reason, they'll have to think twice, because you know what? You have so much knowledge, and getting another person to gain all that knowledge again will take so long. So I think the best thing that you can do, obviously get your work done. That's very important, but also learn as much as you can about the business, if that's applicable, your specific domain, how you can help others, and be vocal about your knowledge. So like if somebody has a question and you have the answer, make that known. Be vocal about the knowledge you have. Go ahead and get that specific. There's so much to learn, right? I'm in a new company right now. I've only been there for a month. Big company, right? Um, and there's a lot to learn. Massive code base, lots of interesting problems, and I'm trying to just learn as much as possible for two reasons, right? Practically, I want to be able to do my job, but also I want to make sure that I become important. And the way that I become important to my manager is by having knowledge that he can lean on. When he has a question, I know that he can turn to me to get that answer. Or if my coworker has a problem, I want them to be able to turn to me to get that answer, to make myself important to my team. So knowledge is super important. Are you in crypto? No, I'm not in crypto. It's funny. A couple of years back, I was just hanging out with a couple of people just talking about blockchain. I got all of them into blockchain. They all started trading Bitcoin, and I still am not into it. I don't know. Just never got into it. How long have you been in development? What's your primary sources of learning? I have been a software developer for a little over 5 years. I started my first professional job in May of 2016. Primary sources of learning really vary. It used to be a lot of plural sites. Nowadays, I would say YouTube. Like I'll start with the topic, Google it, I'll read the documentation, and if I get a little confused by the documentation, I will then turn to YouTube. One of the reasons why I started a YouTube channel as well is because I found that YouTube is a great place to learn and teach. So YouTube, definitely YouTube is a great place to learn, 100%. Abdullah, let me know if I answered that question. You know, if you want any more follow-ups on that, that's a very interesting question. Let me know. So Lewis, that's a funny question, actually. So a little bit of background about how I got into software development in the first place. I actually don't have a CS degree. I technically dropped out of college. I went to college a few years ago. So let's say in 2011, I want to say I started college. And at the time, I was not into software at all. I was actually very into fitness. I wanted to become a physical therapist. And so when I was in college, actually my first semester was as a computer science major because I thought I want to do that. After one semester, I was like, this is not for me. I don't like it at all. And I was like, I'm really into fitness. I want to go for physical therapy. So I did that for a couple of years. And after about 3 years of college, I dropped out and decided to pursue personal training full time because I realized that I was probably not going to get into grad school. I was really bad at math, really bad at chemistry. I failed a lot of courses. I'm like, this is not for me. I'm out. So I decided to just go pursue personal training full time. I did that for like 2 years. Eventually, my wife was expecting her first child. And at that point, everyone in my family was like, okay, you got to do something more because now you're going to start having real expenses. And everyone was kind of pushing me to go back to school. And I was like, I don't want to go back to school. That was a miserable experience for me. I really didn't like it. So, luckily, my brother is also a software developer. In fact, he taught me how to code. So he at the time was just starting to build up his course. So he actually teaches a course locally around where I live, and he created a course to teach programming. Just then he started his course, and on our family chat sent the advertisement for his course. So I looked at the advertisement, and I'm like, why don't I do this? And everyone in my family, except for my wife, was like, what do you mean? You already tried this 5 years ago. What's going to be any different now, right? Now, mind you, when I tried it the first time, I was, I think, 21. And when I wanted to try it now, I was 25. So there's a pretty significant difference in age there. So I'm thinking to myself, well, I'm older, I'm more mature. I now know what I want to do in life. I want to do this. Everyone was like, not going to be any different. You've already tried this and you failed miserably. Like, what's the point? But I said I want to do it. And so I did it. And then I got my first job right after I finished the course. So it was like an 8-month course. Actually learned C#, which was the first language I ever learned. And then I got my first job as a JavaScript and Node developer. So I pretty much never looked back since. But yeah, that's pretty much it for me. So I actually don't consider myself a college grad because, well, I mean, I didn't graduate college. I have my GED and my associate's degree. Is about all I've ever gotten out of my college experience. But that's a great question. Keep them coming. Definitely keep them coming. Is development a rock star job? Um, yeah, I need to know. I need to know what you mean by that. Alex definitely seems to think that it is. I feel like I'm part of a conversation that I don't know anything about because I'm not sure what you mean by rock star job. Does it make you a rock star? All right. Here's what I will say about development is that there's definitely a certain level of like when people ask me what I do and I say that I'm a senior software engineer, certain level of pride that I get because I know that people are like, wow, that's cool. 100%. That exists. But by that same token, there are many instances where people are like, yeah, exactly. So I had a feeling that you were referring to that meme of like rockstar developer, which is a very different thing. That's a very different thing. But yeah, whenever I get to talk about the fact that I'm a senior software engineer, it's cool. I definitely feel a certain amount of pride out of that. How do you tell if a job is going to have long hours, and how do you avoid these jobs? That's a great question, Lewis. That's a really good question. I have fortunately never had that, except once I had a company on the first local outright tell me that they were a small startup and people are expected to work long hours, and I was like, I'm a family man, a father of 2, now 3, not happening. And he's like, okay, I totally get that, respect that, and just kind of moved on. So I was very fortunate that that person mentioned that to me right away. I guess a sort of little barometer that you can use is look at the size of the company. Typically, the smaller startups that are very, very early stage and when they're in like hyper growth can potentially be plagued by this problem. And the best thing that you can do is ask them up front, like, listen, I know that you're a small startup. How is the work-life balance? And then explain to them why it's important that you have a work-life balance. And pretty much from there, when you're like, ask them outright like that, they're gonna more or less try to give you as an honest an answer as possible. I've never felt that that question was met with like a lie or like some kind of like roundabout answer. I was met with like very clear answers when I asked that question. So I think that's probably your best bet. Just ask them outright. It's more like you feel like you have superpowers. Yeah. Yeah, I think software developer definitely can make you feel like you have superpowers. But by that same token, whenever things are not going well, and when you're struggling to solve a problem, suddenly the superpowers feel like they're spun on their head. You suddenly feel like the world's biggest idiot. A friend of mine once told me, I think the best line I've ever heard. Software developers are like junkies. We're constantly chasing the next high, which is very true because literally that's why we do it, right? You're solving a problem, really tough problem. You solve it, you get an immense high, and then you're off to the next problem, and then you have like this immense low because you just can't seem to solve it, and then you solve it again, and then you have the immense high again, and you just keep doing that over and over again. How can I gain as much domain-specific knowledge without seeming like I'm asking the same questions to my coworkers? I have this fear of annoying my coworkers, especially since I'll be working from home. That's a very good question because I personally feel a lot of that the same way, where I'm always worried about asking questions. So one very big benefit that I personally have, I'm going to get to answer your question in just a second, but one big benefit that I personally have is that everyone on my team, the person on my specific team and my specific company, the longest tenure that they have is maybe 6 months. So everyone's still very new and still very much in that learning stage, and people are very willing to help. That being said, so that's my luck with my current company, why I work so well. That being said, in your instance, if you're feeling like you're annoying your coworkers, I think the best thing to keep in mind is that anyone who doesn't want to answer your questions is a bad teammate, right? More or less. I mean, for the most part, that's true. Obviously, there can be a time where like, it also depends on the question that you're asking. If you're asking questions that you should be able to figure out yourself rather easily, or you haven't spent any time trying to figure it out yourself at all, then they can figure that out, and then they may be getting annoyed like, dude, you should have just Googled that, or you should have just checked this yourself. Like, we have a whole doc on this. That's valid, right? That's very valid. So I think the approach that I would take is try to spend 20 to 30 minutes yourself trying to answer your own question. If after 20 to 30 minutes you haven't been able to answer your question, the way to then ask your question to your coworker is to say, listen, this is my question. This is my thought process. This is what I tried doing, and none of this worked. Can you help me? So what this does is it allows you to then go ask your question, indicate that you tried solving it yourself, but you simply still couldn't, and then your coworker will then go ahead and help you. And if after you did that, your coworker is still annoyed, the problem is on your coworker, not you. That's basically how I would see that. How much do front-end engineers need to know about the back-end DevOps, etc.? Typically not much. Right? I think that like where you're being hosted, like whether you're being hosted on AWS or Azure, whether you're using serverless functions or not, whether you're, using HTTP 1 or HTTP 2, or whether you're sitting behind some kind of like Kubernetes cluster or whatever. If you're doing strictly front end, it mostly doesn't matter. There was one instance, however, one time where my coworker actually did solve a problem that we were dealing with in the front end, because he figured out that in one version of the app we were using HTTP 2, and the other version we were using HTTP 1.x. And that's typically not something that front end developers even having to like think about. But him thinking about this helped us solve a very tough to track down issue. So I think the answer that I'm going to go with ultimately is the more you know, the better off you are. In terms of what you have to absolutely know, yeah, you can definitely say that anything after like the API request, you don't have to know. But is your benefit in knowing that? 100%. Jozo asks, working remote versus on-site, which do you prefer more? Me personally, remote. I am like you, Jozo. I 100% prefer working from home. I think that working from home offers a lot of flexibility. So I think, one thing that's also very important to kind of keep in mind is that I am a family man. I'm a father of 3. My wife sometimes needs help. So me being able to work from home means that sometimes if I have to go run an errand, I can just go ahead and do that. There's also less busy work. There's a lot more flexibility. You gain a lot more trust from your managers. You get your work done. You have trust that you're going to do what you got to do. And when you have your free time, do what you got to do, Like today, one of my coworkers had to go get his baby a vaccine shot, right? And he just did it. Like, missed stand up and just did it. Let everybody know, and just went ahead and did that. Like, it's not a big deal. You get that flexibility, which I feel like you have less of that on site. Just been my experience so far. So I love remote. I love feeling like I am being trusted to be my own grown adult and take care of life and take care of my job at the same time. This tea is so cold already. I am absolutely loving these questions, so keep them coming. And I still have definitely some more energy in me to keep going with the stream, so keep them coming. Nope, no questions? Oh, man. No, you've definitely come to the wrong channel for that one, Lewis. I'm sorry. No siree. That's got to be the funniest question I've ever gotten in any comment, any stream ever. Oh, man. Would you say front end is easier than back end? I personally disagree with that statement wholeheartedly. I think that they both serve very different types of, they both give you very different types of challenges, right? One very obvious problem that back end developers have to deal with is data. And sometimes your data comes in some kind of mangled way, and you've got to like unmangle it and get it ready for the front end. And there's a lot of data, you have to do it efficiently. Lots of interesting problems there. Your data structures and algorithms will definitely come in quite useful. That knowledge there is very important. So some very interesting problems that kind of exist there. Databases in general can pose some very interesting problems when you're dealing with backend. So absolutely backend has its fair share of very tough and fun problems to solve. That being said, the front end also has a lot of very interesting problems to solve, right? We have to remember that front end is not going to be running on a super beefy machine that we're going to be provisioning some massive server that can run our machine at full efficiency. We're going to be running on people's machines. Some people will be running it on their old laptops, old phones, or some people are going to be running it on their supercharged M1 Max Pro shenanigan MacBook Pros or whatever, right? The one that I so desperately want, by the way. My wife won't let me get it. Sorry. But my point is, that in itself poses some interesting problems because now we have to also be very performance minded. We have to think about windowing. We have to think about pagination, which is also a back-end concern, right? But we have to also think about making this experience, not having a lot of loaders and spinners. And we want to make sure that things load snappy. We have a lot of JavaScript we want to write. But we want to make sure that the JavaScript bundle is very small. CSS, cross-browser compatibility. Security, right? Back-end folks have to deal with their security holes, but we have to deal with our security holes. There's a lot of interesting problems that front-end developers have to deal with just the same. So to say that one is harder or one is easier than the other, in my opinion, is it's nonsense. It's absolutely nonsense. I've had a lot of fun solving very interesting problems in the front end, and I've had a lot of fun solving fun problems in the back end as well. One is not easier than the other. They're both rife with a bunch of challenges. Right, for example, cross-site scripting attacks is something that front-end developers very much have to deal with. SQL injection is something that back-end developers have to deal with. Also, just think about the amount of technologies that front-end developers have to be comfortable with as well. You have to know JavaScript, you have to know some framework, you have to know some CSS, right? Typically, yeah, and then cross-browser compatibility can be a beast sometimes. Yes, no, exactly. I mean, I definitely feel like that someone who says front end is easy is honestly coming from a place of ignorance, right? That's just my opinion. They don't know enough about what front end really involves, and so therefore they're just coming from a place of ignorance. I'm just gonna tell you, if you're feeling a little bit like you made the wrong choice by going with the front end route, I have definitely had in my career a 60-40 split where I've done more front end than back end. And I'm very happy about it. I have made my bread and butter. In fact, the majority of my resume screams React developer. I've earned most of my big salaries from being really good at React. I'm not shy of the fact that I've done a lot of front end. I'm very proud of it, and you should be too. It's great. Back end is fun though, so do back end as well if you get the opportunity to. But don't feel like you need to justify front end. Sorry, I'm too cheap to pay for Spotify, so that's why you guys are hearing a commercial now. In fact, I should be getting paid by them because I'm now broadcasting the commercial to more people.
Take advantage of helpful videos, tips, and resources to guide you and your loved ones along the way. To learn more, visit Lowe's.com.
By the way, anyone that subscribed or anything like that, did you guys get any kind of alerts or anything? I'm just setting this up for the first time. I'm hoping that my alerts worked when anybody subscribed to the channel because I'm noticing that I got some subscribers. I want to make sure that the alerts actually came through.
From Road Warrior to car
Please let me know.
There are some things you can always count on, like the reliability, durability, and power of DieHard, America's most trusted auto battery. No matter where your journey takes you, count on DieHard to get you started on the road ahead. Available at your local Advance Auto Parts and participating CarQuest stores.
Unlock your room. Open a tab.
All right, looks like we are out of questions. Is that what I'm being led to believe?
One place. Your phone. See why Citizen M is a new way to hotel at citizenm.com.
Get free large fries when you download the McDonald's app today and start earning points on every.
How many of you have actually watched my videos back in the old setup? I mean, how many of you actually know that this setup is not the same as from a few months ago? Just curious. Everybody master in front of it until they need to center a div. Yeah, fortunately though, that's true. Fortunately though, Flex makes that a lot easier now. So that's fortunate. That's helpful. I'd like to eventually become a full stack web developer. I'm entering the industry from a support role. How difficult would that transition would be? That's a great question. That's a great question. I don't know. I don't think that your support role will help you in any which way. I don't think it makes a difference in any which way. I think that your transition, it's at the end of the day, you're gonna have to learn. Maybe okay. Let's do this. Let me know a little bit more about what your support role involved, and then based on that, I might be able to answer that a little bit more specifically. Love the new setup. Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate that. What is your typical work schedule? Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, 8 to 4. Kind of like a 9 to 5, 10 to 6, 11 to 5. It really depends on the day. I don't particularly have a work schedule as much as I'm mostly just focused on making sure that, meaning I plan my day around meetings and tasks. So if I'm going to be peering on a task with somebody, then I'm mostly just like, okay, when is this person going to be online? Let's peer for a couple of hours, get some work done. Or if I've got my own task, then I'm just like, okay, just going to get my work done, see if there's anything else that I can do to be of help, or if there's any meetings that I'm going to miss. One of the big benefits of working for a remote first company where you get to kind of be that flexible, you're not having to think so much in terms of like hours. 9 to 5, 10 to 6 is not as important as it is your meetings, being available for your coworkers. So that's why I also have Slack on my phone. So if I'm like away, I can still answer, right? And then getting your job done, right? That's kind of the big mindset for me. Kind of the big mindset. Okay, so it's a cloud support role for SAP. I'll be tasked with helping companies implement ERP systems to their business. I don't think that that's going to make your transition difficult, but I don't think that's going to help you in any which way. I think that you'll have to just learn front-end web development, but I don't think it's going to make your job harder or easier in any which way. So I think I still stand by that answer, yeah. React versus Angular, best framework, job opportunity. So specifically from a job opportunity perspective, I think React is going to give you more job opportunities. I think so. I could be wrong because I might have like, my own little visors on that only look for React roles, but my impression is that there's a lot more React opportunities than the Angular opportunities. I could be very wrong though. So take that with a big heaping giant grain of salt, but I do think that strictly from a job opportunities perspective, React is better. How would you approach a job search as someone who isn't super good or fond of DSA? I'm a full stack bootcamp grad and I'm really bad with the DSA questions I get for interviews for context. Yes, great question. The way that I typically approach that, and I've always approached that because I myself am also really bad at those types of questions. Like if I need to do it for the job, I know how to Google it and figure it out. I know how to think about it. My natural process is not where if I'm solved with a problem, I solve. If I'm faced with a problem, okay, this is my process in real life, okay? When I'm doing something for a video or for my real work, when I'm faced with a problem, what I always do is walk away. I'll go watch a video, I'll go outside, I'll go make a coffee, I'll sleep on it, I'll take a shower, that's a big one, walk away. That's how I solve my problems. Later on, I come back to it and the problem makes sense to me. For me, it's not natural to have to solve a problem in an hour, right then and there when I'm being watched. So for me, if I know that I'm going to be getting data structures and algorithm test questions, I bow out. Now, if you're very new to the job industry, to this industry, and you don't have a job yet and you're worried about like minimizing your opportunities that way, that's tough. And for that, I don't really have an answer. It really comes down to sort of how much risk are you willing to take on, because there's a lot of opportunities out there where you're not going to have to do those types of questions. A lot of opportunity. So for me personally, I feel like if you're okay with it, bow out of those. If you find out, like if let's say on the first conversation with your recruiter, they tell you that you're going to be doing some amount of like data structures and algorithms, and you don't want to do that, say, it's not for me and leave. I have definitely done that in the past, but again, when I did it, I already had like 5 years of experience. So it is a little different, but you can totally bow out. I've been hearing talks of companies moving to a 32-hour work week, Monday through Thursday, 8 hours a day. Yeah, I think that's awesome. I think what more and more companies are going to start noticing, and I think that's where the 32-hour work week is coming from, is that companies are starting to notice ever since the transition moving to fully remote post-pandemic, or now that we're in the pandemic, however you want to look at it, right? Companies are realizing that it's not about the hours, it's about getting the job done. And at the end of the day, if somebody needs more time, let them take more time. If somebody can get it done in less time and then therefore can close the laptop and go have some fun, no reason why not. Be there for your coworkers, don't miss a meeting, get your job done. Most companies are starting to kind of realize that and adopting that approach, which is why the 32-hour work week makes sense. Thanks for answering your question. I'm off to bed now. Take care. Abdullah, thank you so much for stopping by. I'm happy that I was able to answer your questions. Have a good one. Yeah, I'm a junior, fresh out of the boot camp. I graduated in February. First of all, congratulations for graduating. That's nice. And yeah, I still stand by my answer. I think that 100% you are okay with bowing out. If you don't want to do them, you can totally bow out. There's a lot of opportunity out there where you're not going to have to do that. Now, I think that it's harder when you're a junior, meaning the problem is like this. If you're a junior, what kind of questions can I really ask you? Because you don't have a lot of work experience, so I can't ask you experience-based questions. So therefore, that's why it's a lot easier for them to ask you data structure and algorithm type questions. The way to combat that is to actually have experience. Now, I'm not saying that you get experience from real life projects, but work on a lot of real side projects. So start a blog, start a YouTube channel, or just build side projects just for the fun of it. Having some way to show off side projects is then a great way for them to be like, okay, this person is more than just a junior. They actually know how to build things. Let's talk about that. Let's harp on your actual experience, even if it's not real life experience. So side projects, if you don't have a lot of them yet, start building real life side projects. It makes a very, very big difference. When you were a Node developer, what percentage of the time did you not use Express? Because if you look at the Node doc, there are a lot of other different features, but many of them I haven't used much. Yeah, that's a very good question. Very little, I should say. Almost everything that I do. So, to me, Node is not about the Node. Okay, let's break it down this way. In my mind, Node is broken down of three components. You have the Node core modules, like the FS module, the HTTP module, the crypto module, right? You get it. You know what I'm talking about. The second thing that is broken down of is all the built-in or all the installed modules, all the Node modules that you can make use of. And then the third thing is JavaScript. I 100% have spent most of my time using JavaScript or TypeScript and the installed modules. Very small amounts of time have been actually using the built-in modules, except for like one project once where I was actually being tasked, where I did a small stint working for American Express, and I was being tasked with building a tool for the other developers, which was very heavily involved with like reading in files from like the command line or whatever. So I was very heavily involved with like using the FS module, PWD for like the current working directory and stuff like that. So that was like the most like Node built-in modules I've used. For the most part, yeah. For my experience as a Node developer has been TypeScript and their JavaScript, and then using Express, Connects, SQLize, Bookshelf, you name it, something along those lines, you know, and that's very typical across almost every single Node code base, as far as I can tell. Yeah, I have a good amount of projects. I'm always thinking of new ideas I want to try. I wish that I could make YouTube videos, but I don't know how I would go about it, since I just feel like I know nothing. So my answer to that last point that you just said about feeling like you know nothing, right? That's simply not true, right? If you're able to build a project, then you know something. At a minimum, you have to realize that somebody that actually knows nothing, that's literally, right? One of the things that's very unique about you, if you was to start a YouTube channel right now, is that you actually know how to talk to a beginner. I myself have a hard time with that. I would love to make more. My content is typically not very beginner friendly. I think if you look through my YouTube videos, they're typically not very beginner friendly. And I have a problem with that, because I would like to make more beginner friendly content, but I forget what beginners do and don't know, because it's been so long since I've been there. And it's hard for me to like put myself in that mindset. You, on the other hand, can make very beginner friendly content, which is awesome. So I would definitely recommend that you still make YouTube videos 100%, even if you feel like you know nothing, because at the end of the day, you know a lot more than you think you do. And somebody that truly knows nothing can value a lot from your kind of content. So if you have the idea of making YouTube videos, I 100% say go for it. You should. Keep the questions coming. They're really great questions. Lots of great conversations tonight. True, I just tend to use tutorials for documentation, but I suppose I could always go through them for a visual thing. Thanks for the answer. Either way. Yeah, I mean, think about it. You know, you can explain how you were struggling with a certain something and then just explain how you solved it, right? It seems simple to you, but somebody who's going to be struggling with that same problem now would benefit tremendously from that. Hey, thank you for the subscription, Salvatore. I appreciate that. Thank you, thank you. Welcome to the channel. Sahin? I'm not sure if I'm butchering your name. Please let me know if I'm butchering it. I'm glad that you really enjoyed those 14 questions for React. I would love to do that on Redux. That's a very good idea, actually. I might actually do that. I might make a video all about just some good questions on Redux fundamentals. Interesting. Very interesting. Thank you for that suggestion. Hey, Chaim, thanks for all the React tutorials you've done. They really helped me brush up my skills 4 months ago when I was interviewing for jobs. Hey, I'm so happy to hear that. I'm very, very happy to hear that. That is why I make these videos, so I appreciate that feedback. It means a lot. I see offer mentoring, having someone point you in a good direction. My opinion carries tremendous value. People under... Yes, I agree with that. I agree with that.
Wherever you are, Seagram's refreshing taste is always
Oh man, I wish I didn't have to have commercials, but unfortunately, I'm too cheap to pay for a Spotify subscription.
With a booming voice that emphasizes all the main points. So to help you remember that Liberty Mutual Insurance Company customizes your home insurance so you only pay for what you need.
All right, so I think we're going to keep going for another 20 minutes here. We're going to be ending the stream at 11 o'clock Eastern. So any more questions that anybody has until then, we've got plenty of time still to cover any topics you all want to talk about. So let me know. I'm here.
The season starts now. Save on the latest tech from LG appliances when you shop Black Friday.
So if I was to do a stream tomorrow night, I guess I'm going to ask a question of my own in the meantime. If I was to do a stream of my own tomorrow night, what would be of interest? Just trying to get some ideas.
Anytime, anywhere with LG ThinQ. Shop Black Friday at Lowe's. More ways to save on more. In store, must ask cashier to apply coupon. Savings vary based on purchase amount. Can't be combined with additional discount. Exclusions apply. Valid through 12/1. U.S. only.
All right, so I guess I'm on Mac, 100%. I'm on Mac. Now it could have been Linux. I've never really used it, but I'm on Mac. Rajdeep, that's an interesting question. You have an interview tomorrow for React Native. What can I look for in terms of questions? So here's the problem. I'm very unfamiliar with React Native specifics. So if there are going to be any React Native specific questions, I can't help you with that. However, I imagine that there's going to also be some React specific questions. And if there are React specific questions, then I would very much urge you to brush up on your specific React topics. Like I have two videos discussing 14 questions on React. Those relate to React and the React Native because they're not web specific or mobile specific. Definitely brush up on those. And we can talk about some of those things here if you'd like to, but React Native specifics, unfortunately, I don't think I can help you with. Michael, sorry, I'm probably butchering your name, but thank you for stopping by. How are you? Right. So the actual main topic of this particular stream of us discussing the entire interview process, we've already covered that. If anybody joined after we've already finished that and wants to hear something about that, please feel free to ask me some questions on that. Happy to talk about that again. or at least some Cliff Notes versions of that. So if you joined after I've already finished all that, then definitely let me know. TypeScript versus JavaScript, any case for JavaScript makes more sense. In my opinion, no. Right? I mean, obviously you can do things to a certain extent faster with JavaScript. So if you literally just need to build a script that you're never going to have to look at again, but just need it to be done like right now, just get a script out the door to just do some basic whatever, and it's never going to be looked at again, I can see why JavaScript makes sense. But for any project that is going to get maintained and it really matters in the long run, even if it takes longer now with TypeScript, it makes much more sense to do it with TypeScript because down the line it becomes a lot easier to maintain and becomes faster down the line. So literally, if it's just a build and forget, then fine, go with JavaScript if you want to. But otherwise, TypeScript all day, every day. That's my opinion. So for this next week's video, I am planning on working on a React drag and drop tutorial. It might be next week, it might not. I might push it off to a different week and work on a different topic. But basically, to show off React drag and drop, I was thinking about building the game Rush Hour. Anybody here familiar with the game Rush Hour? Let me know if you're familiar with the game Rush Hour. Been quite a challenge to try to build Rush Hour, actually. A lot harder than I thought it was going to be. But if I get it, if I pull it off, I think it'll make for a pretty cool video. So let me know if you are familiar with the game Rush Hour. No. Okay. So Rush Hour, never mind. I guess when I make the video, I'll just have to give enough context about the game. People might not be familiar with it. I played it as a kid, but maybe people aren't aware of the game. So any other questions around interviews, career advice, things like that? Yeah, so like I said, we've already covered all the main topics in terms of like, you know, when I first started the stream almost 2 hours ago around the interview process. But if you joined after that and you missed it all, definitely let me know. Okay, cool. So then I guess we will call it a night. I will hopefully be back on either tomorrow night or the night after. Probably going to do a coding stream next. Going to think about which particular topics we're going to do on stream, like which code, like which project to work on. Try to build something fun, collaborative, have a good time. Otherwise, I want to thank you all. Jozo, I'm going to take that question. That'll probably be the last question I do then. What span of weeks is acceptable for interview process? An interview process should never take, in my opinion, I would say it shouldn't take more than 6 weeks. Yeah, I don't think it should take more than 6 weeks, if that's what you're asking. If that's what you're asking. Otherwise, I want to thank you all so much for coming by. I want to thank you all of you for watching my stream, watching my content, being here. We're going to probably be back on, I will let everybody know, but I'll probably be back on tomorrow night, or if not the night after, and we're going to do a fun little coding stream. And in the future, we'll probably do some mock interviews, so look out for those as well. But tomorrow night, I want to try to do a coding stream. Okay, cool. So once again, thank you all so much. I'll see you all probably tomorrow. Have a wonderful night.